Thank you, Chair Brown and Ranking Member Toomey. And Dr. Omarova, thank you so much for your willingness to serve. I am grateful for you stepping up even in these most divisive of times. And in our conversations and in my reading of your work and qualifications, I have been wholly impressed. We had a chance to talk a little bit about community banking when we met virtually, so I wanted to follow up on that conversation. And I told you that my grandmother, Avis Iden Mason, who was born in 1898, was a community banker. Her father started the bank, and he was blessed with 3 daughters and no sons, and so my grandmother and her 2 sisters ran that bank. And I remembered dearly and clearly going to visit her and understanding the role that that bank played, because my grandmother and her sisters knew their customers and they knew their communities. Those folks were more than just an entry in a spreadsheet or a data bit in an algorithm. They were their neighbors. And I have to say also, Dr. Omarova, I bet that my grandmother would have had a thing to do or say about what it's like for women to lead in the banking sector, even back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. In Minnesota, we rank 3rd in the nation, actually, in the number of community banks. They're critical to our state, especially in the small towns and rural places that big banks often don't serve. So could you, there's been a lot of statements made about your position on community banking, where you stand on this. Could you just talk to us about how you see the role of community banks in our financial system? And if you're confirmed, describe how you'll approach your role when it comes to regulating community banks.
That's right. Thank you so much, Senator, for this question. I believe that community banks are absolutely the backbone of our American banking system. They are the backbone of that system because they channel credit into real businesses, small businesses, into the real communities, their neighbors effectively. And that is how they generate local jobs and support economic growth. Community banks is not about just the size. It's about the nature of their business. They lend. They do not run complex, risky trading operations. And therefore, I believe that they should be subject to a much more reasonable, tailored regulatory oversight than, for example, large, complex financial institutions that run trading operations in addition to lending. And if I'm confirmed as the Comptroller of the currency, I fully intend to have an absolutely open door policy for all the banks of all sizes and all risk profiles, but my special priority would be to protect, preserve, and strengthen the ability of community banks to do what they do best.
Thank you. So in Minnesota and across the country, community banks are getting gobbled up by big banks and by bigger financial institutions. In fact, my grandmother's bank was bought up years ago. And I'm concerned about big banks and these voracious big tech companies that are increasingly squeezing out community banks that are so important. So, Dr. Omarova, could you talk about that dynamic that we see in the financial sector right now? And as Comptroller of the currency, how do you see your role in ensuring that there's a level playing field for consumer banks, for community banks, in a world where big banks and big tech are elbowing in?
Yes, thank you, Senator. This is a very important problem right now because, of course, the technological advances, they favor large institutions that have the resources and the expertise and the capability to build huge technological platforms and basically take business away from community banks and drive them out of the business. I think it is critical to ensure a level playing field so we protect the relational banking model from being decimated. And if I'm confirmed as the Comptroller of the currency, I would make sure that we do everything we can to facilitate community banks' ability to innovate responsibly, to join the technological progress without being gobbled up by those companies that actually do not play by the same rules and therefore have a greater advantage.
Thank you very much. You know, Dr. Omarova, I think that one of the reasons that the Wall Street banks are fighting so hard against your nomination is because they are afraid that you will be a regulator who is capable and committed of holding them accountable and putting consumers first. And, you know, for too long, let's be honest, for too long, the OCC has had comptrollers who are very chummy with the big banks and who have let bad actors go with just a slap on the wrist. I mean, the stories, there are so many examples. In 2018, JP Morgan Chase reportedly charged 170,000 customers wrong overdraft fees. And what did the OCC do? Well, JP Morgan got away with out paying a dime in fees. Since 2017, the OCC has found at least 6 banks wrongly charged overdrafts, and in each case, the agency basically put a note in their file rather than pushing for real consequences. And who this hurts are the people that are targeted by this kind of behavior. So if big banks are worried about your nomination, I think it's because they're worried that you're going to be independent, because you'll put the interests of consumers first, because you understand how banking works and you know how to hold them accountable. And that's exactly the kind of comptroller that I want to see at the OCC. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Senator Smith. Senator Kennedy from Louisiana is recognized for 5 minutes.